Hello, my name is Dustin the Clue, and I'm here today with... Well, that's not Django like I thought it was going to be.
Okay, first of all, I'm Will Sloan, and this is... Who we see, and he looks just like you and me.
Wait, that's the theme song to the classic Corbucci film, Super Fuzz.
A classic comedy from 1980 about a cop who gets some sort of nuclear power, and he becomes a super cop, or a super fuzz, if you will. To use the lingo.
And that is the most famous film that Sergio Corbucci, the director of Django, The Great Silence, and The Mercenary, is known for.
He's a super trooper, really super duper.
Or we're just going to sit here and listen to the whole song?
Okay, I'll turn it off, finally. Sorry, that's a hilariously unprofessional way to start the podcast, but I just wanted to bring that music up because, first, I love it. You know, even now, Super Fuzz is the movie I think of when I think of Sergio Corbucci.
Is it?
Well, actually, probably not. But
probably Django.
Probably Django, and then The Great Silence, and then Super Fuzz. Now, Sergio Corbucci, along with Sergio Leone...
And Sergio Solima.
...is the other great spaghetti western director.
Is he? Because a man named Burt Reynolds would say that he's the wrong Sergio.
Well, Burt Reynolds is dead now, and he knows nothing.
Okay.
Burt Reynolds has
a harsh burn against Burt.
I'll tell you something about Burt Reynolds. The man had a sewer of a filmography.
He did have a sewer.
One bad movie after another. So what is he thought Boogie Nights was the wrong movie to make. So.
Yeah, you know what? You're 100% true. Yeah. And Sergio Corbucci gave Burt Reynolds a shot in a little film called Navajo Joe.
Before we get into Navajo Joe, some preliminary thoughts on Sergio Corbucci, who he is, why he's important. He was working at the same time as the other great Sergio.
Mm-hmm. Solima.
Yeah. He never quite got the acclaim, and still doesn't quite get the acclaim of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Once Upon a Time in the West. But his films, at their best, are almost as good. He has a bigger and wobblier filmography. I mean,
he's made more films. The thing about Leone is that he made big, epic movies that knew they were epic. They were long. They just got bigger and bigger as they went along as well. Mm-hmm. While Corbucci was just a workaholic, show up for work, do your job. Before he made all those westerns that he was famous for, he made a dozen melodramas and comedies starring the likes of Toto.
And, you know, Sergio Leone's filmography, he made, 6 or 7 films? And there's only one there that's like...
Oh, there's a few.
Obvious
there's
hack.
A few.
No, but what I mean is there's only one obvious hack movie.
Yes.
Like The Colossus of Rhodes, his first movie.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a lot of these Italian exploitation guys that you love have reams and reams of subpar films, and you sort of know them only for that upper tier of their filmography. And that's what Sergio Corbucci is.
Yeah, people know him, as we previously mentioned, Django, The Great Silence, The Mercenary.
The Mercenary, yeah. And, you know, and maybe Navajo Joe as well, and one or two others.
Yeah, I mean, even Corbucci, in the year that he directed Django, the film that he is the most famous for, he also directed Navajo Joe, and another film, I believe it was A Golden Pistol for Ringo, or something around that title.
That sounds about right. I mean, all these spaghetti westerns, they all have titles like A Second to Live, A Minute to Die.
And we should point out that after Django came out, there were 150 films that had Django in the title, even though they had nothing to do with the Sergio Corbucci original.
Django, prepare a coffin.
Yeah.
Django, kill. Shoot first, ask Django later. Or, you know, whatever.
Django versus Ringo. Ringo being another character that appeared in the movies A Pistol for Ringo and The Return of Ringo, and then had another million movies named after him.
Now, Sergio Corbucci's movies were, you know, not particularly well received in their time.
Nope.
And there is still, even though he has been somewhat reclaimed, there's still something about him that feels kind of dirty and disreputable. His westerns are violent and nasty and bleak, and, you know, his is easily the darkest west.
We should take a step even further back and explain what spaghetti westerns are, which is what Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci are famous for. I think I would describe them as not necessarily like demystifying anti-westerns, but just the movie brat version of the Westerns. Sergio Corbucci in an interview would say stuff like, I wanted to make Westerns that I loved growing up as a kid, take all the boring parts out, and also make them more violent. The way that when you're a kid and you play with your friends, those movies are super violent because you want to push them to the next level. And people like Sergio Corbucci, that's what he was doing with his films.
In the early 60s, of course, the Western was kind of on its last legs in Hollywood. It was, people like John Wayne making their sort of flabbier late period efforts. But, the kids who grew up with these movies, particularly in Italy, and sort of these movies were their view of America, right? And so they made these movies that repurposed some of the old tropes in a darker sort of way.
When people talk about Westerns now, they talk about these kind of deconstruction of Westerns. And you could say that a lot of spaghetti Westerns kind of did do that.
I think the title, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, sort of invites that interpretation.
But it's also more like myth-making when it comes to Westerns. It's not about a deconstruction of showing how it really is. It's like, I want to show you these figures, and I want to make them epic and giant. The way that a kid views Westerns. At the same time, they will also be very violent, cynical, and the heroes will not be good or bad. They'll be gray down the middle, but that's what makes them so much more special for the viewers that see them.
And so, not to get all armchair sociologist here, to revive one of my favorite phrases, but,
your favorite characters.
The spaghetti Westerns were, of course, being made during the time of Vietnam. They were being made during the time when people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were being assassinated. So they're heavily informed by that moment.
There's a whole spaghetti Western that is a recreation of the JFK assassination. So, they were very aware of the political time or what had come before and kind of putting them in this familiar genre.
I was reading Alex Cox's book, 10,000 Ways to Die, and he said that, when he was a young school child, he would see the Hollywood Westerns and he would be hoping to see some sex. There's never any sex.
No.
But he was reasonably hoping to see some violence, and old John Wayne was not really delivering even that at this point. And the spaghetti Westerns really were violent, and that's why they were a touch disreputable at the time.
So Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars comes out in 1964. This is the one that kicks it all off. Before Sergio Corbucci was making melodramas, he had been working for a long time, but he was friends with Sergio Leone. They had worked together as assistant directors, they knew each other, and supposedly they both went to the theater together and saw Yojimbo, and were like, we want to make that, but Leone beat Corbucci to the punch.
Yojimbo, of course, is Akira Kurosawa's film, which was also heavily informed by Hollywood Westerns. I mean, It's interesting how these things, one thing feeds into the other and then feeds into the other.
I mean, A Fistful of Dollars is a ripoff of Yojimbo to the point that I believe that Kurosawa sent a worded letter, if not some lawyers, Leone's way.
Yeah, but of course, A Fistful of Dollars was an international phenomenon, which led to Django. But after all those years as a journeyman filmmaker, 1966 was the year that Corbucci sort of came into his own with two Westerns that would be two of the defining films in his filmography, Django and Navajo Joe.
Let's talk about Navajo Joe first, because that is one that has the lesser reputation, specifically from Mr. Reynolds, who would say stuff like, it's the worst movie I've ever made, and they could only show it in prisons and mental asylums.
You know why I think he said that? I think he was just jealous of Clint Eastwood.
I absolutely agree with you, yes.
Probably to his dying day was jealous of Clint Eastwood.
Yep. I mean, they were friends back on the lot when they were, extras.
Yeah, so. They made City Heat together. But hey, that's a digression. Burt Reynolds plays the title character Navajo Joe, who is the only survivor of the native village that was massacred by a gang of bandits, and he goes around an avenging angel for this village.
Burt Reynolds in this film wears brownface, and while he would claim that he has some Native American ancestry, this has never really been proven, and whatever way you want to go about it, this is problematic in this film.
Don't we all have Native American ancestry in kind of the Elizabeth Warren sense?
Yes. But in this film, he plays an avenging angel, and he plays the kind of ultimate spaghetti Western hero. Not on screen that much, just kind of shows up to do some stuff, kill some villains. We spend most of the time with the main antagonists and the townsfolk who are afraid for their lives.
By the way, I think Burt, when he does show up, he does some pretty incredible stunts in this movie, like jumping from horses. And
he is doing so many crazy stunts in this film that you can see it's his face. He goes over the top of a train and like lifts himself into the car to like fire a gun.
Of the Corbucci westerns that I've seen, this is kind of the jolliest one. It's kind of a you can imagine this one being the one that's like, we're going to get a big Western crossover audience with this.
It's the most comic book one, like probably the most pop Western.
Yeah.
It's not really bothered with any kind of, look at the cycle of violence or cynicism. It is still violent, but in more like a, like, four-color, like, it's the good guys versus the bad guys kind of way.
And Navajo Joe's a superhero.
Yeah.
It's played by fucking Burt Reynolds. And
Yeah.
it's bright and it's got stunts. And I really enjoyed this movie. I was surprised that it doesn't have a great reputation.
I'm really surprised as well. I think maybe Burt Reynolds putting it down. I mean, it's not the brown face because people did not care back then.
I mean, it's probably not in my top 10 spaghetti westerns or anything, but it's got all the things I like in a spaghetti western.
It has all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
No deconstructing here either. Just, good guys versus bad guys with that extra layer of gore and a massive body count.
And it also has like a very big scope, which is very different from Corbucci's other big 1966 Western, DJANGO, which in terms
DJANGO!
Why have you always been alone?
You know that song is actually not composed by Ennio Morricone because he did not do the score for Django?
Yeah. Was that song commissioned for this movie, or did
Yes, it was.
Okay.
All the best Westerns have their own theme songs, sung by someone who English is not necessarily their first language, but they're going to power through.
And, DJANGO is, I guess, considered the most famous, I think the most famous non-Leone Western. But again, as with Corbucci, it still has this vaguely disreputable feeling to it because it's so grim and violent.
And it was never a hit in America. It was released very briefly in LA. It was banned supposedly in the UK for violence.
Until the 90s.
Yeah, and it was popular in other places in Europe.
It did, however, feature Franco Nero's star-making performance.
Old Blue Eyes himself.
He plays the title character, Django, a wandering loner who comes into this ghost town, basically. It's just this muddy town that's been ravaged by the Civil War.
Corbucci at the time wanted it to be snow, but he didn't have an opportunity to do that, but he will get back to that in a movie from now.
Yeah.
So Django, you missed a very important part, is that he drags a coffin behind him at the beginning of the movie, and you don't know what's in it. He doesn't really say, like most spaghetti Western heroes, he doesn't talk too much.
But he's in this town with this coffin, and the town, basically the only population of the town is the local brothel and its inhabitants. And the rest of the town is just this muddy puddle that is the home of a turf war between, on the one hand, an American gang of ex-Civil War soldiers, racists.
Yeah.
Run by...
They wear Ku Klux Klan hoods, but they're red.
Yeah, and they are presiding over this area, but then there's also the Mexican bandits on the other side. And Django finds himself sort of, much like Yojimbo or the Man with No Name, sort of caught between these rival gangs and trying to play the gangs off each other.
Well, I mean, Django wants revenge on the racists, and he takes it pretty fast because, like most spaghetti Western heroes, Django is invincible. He can shoot the gun behind his back, he can do all kinds of really cool shit, until the movie calls for him to be injured. I remember watching the Sergio Leone Westerns and being like, wow, these films have such a set structure. Like, at this part, Clint Eastwood is going to be beaten up. And it happens in almost all spaghetti westerns because they're all kind of riffing off those three original ones. Yeah. And it happens the same way in Django. He essentially, we learn, wants revenge. And he could take revenge if he wanted to. But he doesn't because he gets too greedy.
I'd just like to quote from Alex Cox again because I think he gets at something about the Corbucci versus Leone filmographies. Leone's West was one of uneasy alliances between godlike men, cat-like, innately violent Westerners, cold, technological Easterners, and Mexican bandits. Corbucci's West was a world without alliances, in which one man, usually crippled, maimed, or blind, was forced to confront two gangs of equal villainy. In Leone's world, money was always the goal and usually attainable. In Corbucci's world, money was mentioned, then quickly forgotten in a downward spiral of torture, destruction, and loss.
Well, in Django, money and greed is what takes Django down. Because he could escape and get what he wants and leave and be happy, but, you know, he goes too far.
Well, he wants to start a new life for himself. He wants to, like, never again have to worry.
Yeah.
And he wants to take his, you know, sex worker girlfriend with him, potentially. But
and nope, everything goes bad, and in probably one of the most brutal torture sequences in the popular spaghetti westerns, his hands are broken beyond repair.
So, you know, I've seen this movie 3 or 4 times. I love this movie, and I loved it even more now. Maybe I was just in the right mood for it today, but there was something about its overwhelming, despairing tone that really resonated with me. I mean, you know, the John Ford westerns that were such a big influence on these spaghetti western guys, John Ford really believed in family and community, and there's absolutely none of that. However else John Ford might have influenced Corbucci didn't believe in community. You know,
I mean, Django's final message seems to be like leaving the violent world behind is the only way to keep going, to put down your gun. Because if you're Django and you are the best, like, it seems like he could win the Civil War by himself. And the only reason he gets caught is because he lets his guard down because he's trying to go after money. And it hurts the people close to him and hurts him, which leads to probably, in my opinion, the most memorable scene in the film, which is when he has to take on the bad guys in the cemetery, but both his hands are broken. So we watch him for what seems like an eternity try to put a gun with broken hands on the top of a gravestone. And every time he's just about to do it, the gun tumbles back to the ground.
There are very few settings in this movie. It's almost kind of like a stage play, actually, just in terms of the scope of it. I mean, all you have are like this muddy, horrible town, and you know, the way Corbucci shoots the town, there's a lot of atmosphere. Like he films this ugly town in a very beautiful way.
Something that caught my interest on this viewing is that Corbucci didn't shoot the film in the like Technoscope or super widescreen that Leone's famous for. He actually shot in the European widescreen ratio, which is 1:6, which actually gives a lot more room on the top and bottom, and the sides are smaller.
And you know, it makes sense because this is not a movie with a great scope.
No,
you know, it's
not a cramped movie, and you're really looking at these faces. I mean, Leone was so famous for the close-ups that he would do of Clint Eastwood or Lee Van Cleef, and you know, Corbucci's doing the same thing, but the people are even more miserable than in any of those other films.
And you know, if there's, I guess, a couple of like glimmers that keep the movie from being just an utterly despairing experience, there's the gallows humor of the fact that, you know, these two groups are fighting over what is basically nothing.
Well, Corbucci liked to say that when he makes these movies, he believes that there's a difference between grotesquerie and cruelty, and that he wanted to lean more toward the side of grotesquerie. Because, you know, we say that, like, the film is cynical and downbeat, but I think Corbucci has joy in what he's doing. I read some interviews where he's like, you have to figure out different ways to kill people. You can't just kill them the same way each time.
Well, there's a very memorable scene involving an ear in this film.
Yes, being cut off. Shades of Reservoir Dogs, perhaps? Then it goes one step further, and the man whose ear got cut off is forced to eat it.
Yeah.
And we may say, you know, this is not Cannibal Apocalypse by any stretch of the imagination, or Cannibal Holocaust. It is just like grimy, and it's gross, but it still has all the aesthetics of the spaghetti western. Did you know that Roberto Deodato, the director of Cannibal Holocaust, was the AD on this film?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
He was.
You know, the other kind of spark of humanity in Django, I think, also come in Franco Nero's piercing blue eyes.
Oh my God.
And
they look like they're CGI'd in.
I mean, I think Nero is very well used in the film. You know, Nero has a lot of, you know, natural charisma, similar to how Clint Eastwood does, but Corbucci is always framing him as, you know, looking up from under his hat, and then whenever he looks up from under his hat, he stares into the camera. Like, I don't think he blinks in this movie. You know,
yeah, or doesn't feel like he does, and I mean, that's the same thing, isn't it?
And you know, like, this is a movie with just so much like gray and brown and blood red.
But then you got his eyes,
got
just
those
staring
eyes,
right into the camera,
piercing you, and it's got that great theme song too.
Django. So Corbucci's other like super famous western is The Great Silence. I don't think we can talk about The Great Silence without spoiling the thing it's most famous for. So if you want to watch the movie without hearing any of our critical thoughts, go do it now and then come back.
And please do.
I knew how it ended before I watched it.
Did you know for sure? Or could you just tell?
Oh, I knew because I had read it. Because that's what it's famous for. Like, you can't read about the Great Silence without reading about its ending. So this movie stars Jean-Louis Trintignant, who most famously appeared in...
He was in My Night at Maud's, as well as more recently Michael Haneke's Amour.
That's right.
And he's worked with all the great European art house guys.
The joke goes that he said, Corbucci, I can't speak any English, I'm not very good at it. And Corbucci went, don't worry, we'll make you a mute character. Which is a ridiculous statement because Corbucci was famous, like all Italian films, they shot without sync sound. And because they were international cast, we all spoke different languages, and they would just say, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 when they would do their lines. And then somebody else would dub them later. But in this film, Jean-Louis Trintignant plays a gunslinger with his throat slit who comes to a snowy town of prospectors looking for revenge.
He's quickly hired to kill a local bounty hunter, Loco, or some versions, the character's name is Tigrero, played by Klaus Kinski, who's a bounty hunter, a completely amoral bounty hunter who is sort of working in cahoots with, the state has a really corrupt governor who's killing all the poor and dispossessed people sort of under the guise that they're bandits.
And so he can take their land as well.
Yes. And Kinski is out sort of, killing people who are allegedly bandits who just have land. And, one of the people he kills is a black man, and the black man's wife hires him to kill Klaus Kinski. Now, also working in this town, there's a kindly sheriff who, of course, eventually ends up getting killed by Klaus Kinski. And, Kinski is part of a network of bandits, basically, who take over this town. And I guess now we're going to get into spoiler territory.
So this film is famous for... it's Ennio Morricone score, like all great spaghetti westerns, for its novel setting of being set in the snow.
And, if you've seen Django Unchained, as I'm sure you have... the snowy sections of that movie are heavily derived from this.
And you also have The Hateful Eight, which looks exactly like this film as well.
Yeah.
And they're wearing very similar costumes.
Yeah.
And so the film, like we said, has that spaghetti structure. Silence gets his hands broken, so he can't fire his guns anymore. Oh, how is he going to pull the Django out of this one to save the townspeople that Klaus Kinski's holding hostage? Well, he does not. And he gets killed. And Klaus Kinski walks away unharmed with all of the bandits. And that's how the movie ends.
And it's essentially a foregone conclusion that Silence is going to die.
There's so many other spaghetti westerns where the hero just pulls it out.
I guess you're right, but it's like...
I think you're looking at it from knowing how it ends.
You know what? Maybe I am, because the whole meaning of the film... Before Silence goes in for the showdown, his hand has been broken.
Like Django.
Like Django. But he says, I don't care that my hand's broken. I'm going to go in and I'm going to fight Klaus Kinski anyway. He doesn't say this because he's mute. But
you see it in his eyes.
But you see it in his eyes, yeah. And by the way, 2 great performances in this movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, seriously great. Like, Kinski as the villain. Honestly, I think he's every bit as good as he is in the Herzog movies in this movie.
Well, there's like... a softness to him. Like, it would have been easy for him to be like the angry, chewing up the scenery Kinski. That's not what he does. Yeah. He plays it like this is his job. He's not going to play by the rules. It's almost like not even personal either what he's doing.
And he's sort of bemused by everything also. Like, he's kind of having fun.
And so, like, when the end of the movie happens, I can just imagine seeing it for the first time and not knowing anything what it's about and being like, what the hell? Because I saw that happen to my good friend Matthew Kumar when I watched the movie with him. He had no idea, and he was pissed.
Yeah.
He hated the ending. He's like, what the fuck was that?
I mean, it definitely took me off guard the first time I saw it.
Yeah. You're like, okay, what's going to happen after this? Nothing. It's credits.
Yeah.
I mean, you can skip to the DVD where there's a very funny, goofy alternate ending.
Well, this ending is one of the reasons why the movie was never distributed, really, in the West. It was sort of unofficially remade as Joe Kidd with Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, which is also set in the snow, and the Clint Eastwood character has the same gun that Silence uses in this movie.
And, trying to understand the ending a bit more, because, again, it could end like Django. It could end happily. But Corbucci at the time was apparently very influenced by the deaths of both Che Guevara and Malcolm X, who he regarded as these martyrs who they were almost like predestined to die. It's like Malcolm X was obviously going to die, and yet he kept going out there anyway and giving his message.
When Silence walks up to Kinski, he doesn't even have a weapon, he doesn't have anything, and he just gets shot in the head and dies. Mm-hmm. And then all the village people get killed afterwards as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's like there's no victory in this film.
And what's heroic about it, or Corbucci would regard it as heroic, is the fact that even knowing he was going to die...
He went out anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so on that note, talking about what many people consider Corbucci's masterpiece, let's move on to what obviously we consider his greatest work, Super FUZZ.
Super.
So, I should give a little bit of context in that the spaghetti westerns, essentially their big popularity started in 1964 with A Fistful of Dollars, and the death knell was a movie called They Call Me Trinity that starred a Franco Nero lookalike named Terence Hill. Not only does he look like Franco Nero, the producers, a few years before, knew that, and they cast him in a Django film because he has that same facial features. And so They Call Me Trinity, which started a kind of comedy western cycle with Terence Hill and this other portly actor named Bud Spencer, just killed the genre, killed Sergio Corbucci's western career, and he actually became a director of Terence Hill and Bud Spencer comedies. Mm-hmm. And so in 1980, Corbucci found himself directing a film in America starring the actor Terence Hill, who killed his western career. And that film was called Super FUZZ.
Now, we saw Super FUZZ for the first time maybe 10 years ago at University of Toronto at Innis College had, the annual cult night where, back then, the Cinema Studies Student Union used to actually have 35 millimeter prints of movies that they showed.
Let's be honest, they still have 35 millimeter prints of movies, they just don't show them.
Well, it's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so that night it was a triple feature of Super FUZZ, Barbarella, and I think Dolomite.
Perhaps. I mean, I don't know if I was there, because I saw Super FUZZ, but I did not see Barbarella, and I did not see Dolomite that night.
I'm just certain that Barbarella was the same night.
Okay, because I've never seen Barbarella, so I don't think it was that night, unless I just watched Super FUZZ and left. Or saw
possibly
Super
you
FUZZ
watched
left.
Super FUZZ and left.
Yeah.
But they had a print of Super FUZZ, and I remember Peter came up and he said, none of us have seen this movie, but that's a great trailer.
Peter Kaplowski,
yeah.
programmer of Midnight Madness.
Yeah, who comes up on every podcast, I think.
Yep, pretty much.
Anyway, and Super FUZZ unfolded before our eyes, and I feel like Mr. Bernstein in Citizen Kane, where it's like, I bet a month hasn't gone by that I haven't thought of that film.
You didn't rewatch it for this podcast?
Oh, I went on YouTube and I watched highlights and stuff.
Because I sat down and watched it with my friend Duncan Bruce, and he's a big aficionado of Italian stuff and any of those 70s, 80s comedies, and we just both ate it up.
It's honestly so fun.
I mean, it's this goofy kind of slapdash movie that Terence Hill and Ernest Borgnine play two cops, and Terence Hill gets hit by a nuclear bomb, essentially, and his powers include anything psychic. He's invulnerable.
He can break through walls.
Yep,
he can jump
super
out
strong.
Windows.
But there's one little problem. If he sees the color red, he loses all his powers.
Which really doesn't make sense, because the color red is everywhere.
Yes.
It's unavoidable. It's in the color spectrum. Red's there even when you don't notice it.
There's some really funny scenes, though, where he's talking to his captain. He's like, oh, let me show you, I have powers. And he jumps out the window, and you just hear crunch, and he looks out, and he's landed on the car. He's like, oh, and it's because there's a red mailbox there.
Well, the movie starts in media res. There are flashback scenes, but it starts with him. He's on death row, but they've tried to put him in the chair 4 times already, because each time it hasn't worked.
Yeah. And he just explains everything that went on, which is in the vein of all these Italian comedies. It's very silly slapstick all over the place.
There's a scene where he talks to a fish.
That's right. There's a scene where they try to electrocute him, and he electrocutes the people watching him,
Yeah,
I assume,
so
killing them, and then he jumps out of the prison by crashing through the wall.
Now, that all sounds good, but what you've also got to remember is this is an Italian movie that's pretending to be American.
Yes.
So it has that weird disconnect.
Yeah, but you have Ernie Borgnine there yelling.
Well, it must be an American movie.
Yeah.
Ernest Borgnine is in it.
What are you doing?
There's that whole classic scene towards the end when he's like on top of like a hot air balloon.
It's a bubblegum balloon that Super Fuzz blew up.
Yeah.
Yep, and then Ernest Borgnine's like, I'm on my way down.
There's also a great scene where Super Fuzz, like, he thinks his number is up. He's like about to surrender, but he shoots a gun and he hits a passing rocket.
Yep, that makes the nuclear bomb go off.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, as you can tell, this is a film of many wonders that doesn't have the touch of the man that made The Great Silence or Django, or even Navajo Joe. It's just a silly, I guess, journeyman job.
So, Corbucci's career, the golden period of it shone briefly but brightly.
He was actually pretty disappointed with his career because while he worked a lot, he thought Django was one of his weaker films, and it wasn't received as well financially as he would have hoped.
And The Great Silence was just a straight up flop all over. Like, it didn't even do well in Italy.
So that while he could keep working, like reading interviews and watching documentaries on him, you get the sense that he never really worked in the way that he wanted to.
And I mean, I can imagine him being very jealous of his old colleague, Sergio Leone, who, Sergio Leone has this small but impeccable filmography, and in the 80s he was making Once Upon a Time in America. I mean, how could he not be jealous of that?
And while Corbucci was making all these other films...
Super Fuzz.
Yeah, people, were just trashed. And while Corbucci, he did get that critical attention, when he passed away in 1990, his wife said that he didn't really feel it. People may have been talking, in zines and stuff like that, but it's not like these deluxe editions of Django and other films of that ilk. Like, it hadn't reached him yet, which is a real bummer, especially for someone who worked so long and so hard throughout his career.
But you know what? He's still just a little bit disreputable. And that's kind of a beautiful thing.
All right. So, as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week on our Patreon, we talk about gods. No, we don't. We talk about Mothra, everyone's favorite Godzilla character.
That's right, folks. We watched the 1996 classic Rebirth of Mothra.
Me and Will had never seen it.
Whoa.
I know. You want to hear our reactions? You're going to have to pay $5 a month by becoming a member at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. We should also note that there is a Discord server, which is a chat room for people not in the know. And if you become a Patreon subscriber, you can hang out in it and chat with all the other Important Cinema Club fans. And I'm trying to set a date now that I'm going to try on Thursdays. It will happen this Thursday that I'll be there on 7 o'clock. And I'll stay there for a couple hours. We can chit-chat. We can talk about this episode, talk about your favorite Westerns, whatever you want. And maybe even Will show up. Who knows? No promises.
I should come in more. It's a nice community. I'll have the Discord on one window, and then the other window will be porn. And then I can multitask.
Water power.
Yeah, I can multitask.
And Forced Entry.
All the best films.
And so you can become a member by just going to Important Cinema Club, by going to patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. So, our first letter is from Michael Hendra, loyal listener, and it goes, Important Cinema Tattoos. Hey fellas, it's Mike Hendra, the tattoo guy. So I actually have a tattoo-related question for you both.
This is a bit of context, by the way. Michael got a tattoo of our logo on his body.
But I should note, he has multiple tattoos, and he owns a tattoo shop.
Yeah.
So,
but it's still an incredible honor.
It is a great honor. And the letter continues, regardless of how you personally feel about receiving a tattoo, have you ever considered getting a movie-related one? If so, what would you get? Have you any now? I envision Justin having a beautiful Jackie Chan back piece, or at the very least a small Bruce Lee portrait on his chest. Will, on the other hand, would have a subtle nod to Curly Joe on his kneecap.
It's funny you should say that because my mind was racing right now. What would be my tattoo?
Is it Curly Joe?
Not Curly Joe, but I think I would have Mo Larry Curly on my lower back.
Really?
And I'd say, it was a crazy spring break mistake,
So when you wear, the crop top, you can see at the back below. I'm sure people out there do have a Curly Joe tattoo, but wouldn't you want to be part of that family?
Yeah.
How would you differentiate him from Curly Joe versus...
You know what? I'll get a tattoo that's all the Third Stooges. So it'll be Shemp, it'll be Joe Besser, Curly Joe, and it'll be Ted Healy, just to throw
and Joe Besser's going, not so hard!
They'll have a little speech bubble with their memorable quotes.
Jokes aside, there's countless ways to show off your love for cinema, and you both do that on a daily basis anyway.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Shucks.
I hope all is well, and my tattoo of your two amazing faces healed up nicely, by the way. I was hoping it'd leave, a terrible scar that never healed. My dream is to someday have you both sign your faces, and I'll tattoo those too. #life goals. Yours truly, Mike. That's scary.
It is scary. It's a very attainable life goal.
I like to say that my signature is very easy to forge. So if you look around, I'm sure you could probably find an example of it. And as far as cinema tattoos, I had one a little while ago, and it just dropped my mind, and I don't know what I would get instead. I mean, if you get a tattoo, I don't know if I'd be like a big full back tattoo guy.
You know, the thing that I think, among other things that Me Too has revealed, it's that really you can't trust anyone.
Okay.
So I would think like, God, was there a time in my life when like a Woody Allen tattoo would have been really cool?
Oh my God.
Could you imagine?
I was wondering where you were going with this.
Yeah, like, but or just like anyone.
You know who I get a tattoo of? The Big G. Just a nice little Godzilla tattoo.
Yeah, he's not going to get Me Too'd at any time. Yeah. But, like, you know there are people with Bill Cosby tattoos out there.
Oh, you do. And it's like a goofy, like, Bill Cosby tattoo.
Wearing a sweater and he's got Jell-O and shit. Yeah.
I don't know if I could do an actor. It would probably have to be, like, a character of something. Will's looking around my room right now.
I'm trying to think, is there anything on your shelf that, I don't know, maybe The Little Tramp, speaking of pedophiles.
Yeah. I mean, he's dead, right?
So it's okay. Statute of limitations.
Matt Farley's face on my shoulder.
Okay, so Matt Farley's face would be a great tattoo because it's a conversation piece. People would say, what's that? You say, oh, do you know the guy who wrote 20,000 songs on Spotify?
Yeah.
Well...
He makes movies, too.
Yeah.
And scan this QR code, and you can listen to, oh, wait, QR codes don't exist? I did not think this tattoo through.
I know, let's get Matt Farley's phone number and tattoo it on our bodies, because I think he would like that.
Both of our tattoos. I'm going to get the Important Cinema Club forever on my back.
Yeah.
No, it needs to be somewhere visible, so...
Well, I mean, if we ever have a dramatic falling out, that would be really bad.
Yeah, but that's what tattoos are good for.
Right, and then you'll change it so it says wino forever.
Oh, it'll be like, I don't know how I would change Important Cinema Club into something else. You know what? I'll think about it. I'm looking around the room right now.
Do you remember that guy who sent us a letter that said Important Enema Club?
That's Is that what we're going to get tattooed on your back?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's going to be like an arrow pointing down to your asshole.
Good stuff.
Michael, we hope to meet you one day, and we will both sign your tattoos. You want it big? Probably small, right? You don't want it...
Yeah. God, that would feel like a lot of pressure.
Of like how you're going to sign your name?
Well, I would have to make sure it's a really good signature.
And he's like, I want you to sign it with my tattoo needle to add that much extra pressure. All right, well, thank you again very much for the letter. So next week... in an attempt to get more listeners and to talk about movies that people can go, oh, I can watch that right now, we're going to be talking about Carol Reed, who Criterion just posted 3 of his movies, Odd Man Out, Third Man, and The Fallen Idol, on the Criterion channel, which I'm sure every listener listening to this is subscribed to it. Does Carol Reed have a place in your film watching beyond The Third Man?
What was that music I just did? You know?
Yeah, The Third Man.
That's right.
I mean, have you seen another film by Carol Reed other than The Third Man?
I'm actually not sure if I have.
Yep.
So this will be a process of discovery for me, because like Third Man for me was always sort of like,
oh, Orson Welles directed all the great scenes, right?
I mean, that's the thing. It was like I liked. I got to The Third Man because of the Orson Welles connection, not
as most people do.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to explore.
All right, so that's what we'll be doing next week. And until then, I am Justin McClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. I'm going to have to interrupt here for a second to thank some of our new Patreon subscribers, which include Patrick Cardinal, Maka Nitipasanan, Chris Turton, Ted Kelly, Jack Fenor, BDA, Darren Cowlin, Guy Davidson, Juan Pablo Meza Artman, and Zachary Hilton. Thank you all for becoming Patreon subscribers. I really appreciate it, especially because I'm looking to get some new equipment to be able to improve the podcast. So if you're thinking of becoming a Patreon subscriber now, this is the perfect opportunity to do it. We are so close to hitting 200 Patreon subscribers. And when we hit that number, I can assure you that something special is going to happen. So if you've been on the fence until now, or you were a Patreon subscriber and for reasons out of your control you had to stop, get back on there. Join the $5 level to get the exclusive episode every week. You can hang out in a chat room with other listeners and me and Will, or join the $10 level and get the newsletter that goes out every month, printed, and is sent to your mailbox. All right, and back to our regular scheduled programming.
Well, the hot new movie out this week is called Detective Pikachu.
Pokemon, gotta catch 'em all. Pokemon.
I didn't like Pokemon growing up.
You didn't?
No, it was...
I'm sorry, I'm watching my Woody Allen films right now.
Well, okay, you say that, but...
I'm not lying.
But actually... airing on during the same time slot that it was on was Monty Python's Flying Circus when I was a kid, and I used to watch that. Which, fourth grade was a little lonely at times, but
I knew I was better than everybody else.
I did, and you know what? I think time has vindicated me.
Has it? Let's look at the box office of Detective Pikachu. So I wanted to talk about this because Detective Pikachu's coming out. And Pokemon is one of those things that consumed me as a child. I had one of the video games.
You had the red and the blue?
Yeah, I think I probably had blue.
Okay.
And I watched a cartoon. It played every day. And all the games and merchandise. It was endless. Played the Pokemon card game.
Oh, yeah. I remember all that shit.
But
I hated it all.
Yeah, why can't there be a Monty Python? But I like Monty Python too. Can't we like both?
It was hard when I was in fourth grade and there was the thing that I loved passionately and everybody else was watching Pokemon at the same time.
Well, you can't do both? Because I did. Because I love Monty Python.
Well, okay, here's the thing. I tried Pokemon.
Oh, and you didn't like it.
I watched the
This is
cartoon.
a baby game.
I don't know. I fucking hated everything about it. And then one of the great moments of my childhood was some kid at a birthday party. Well, actually, it wasn't some kid. It was my good friend Peter.
Peter Kapowski.
Not Peter Kapowski, another Peter. And we went to see Pokemon the first movie.
Oh, I saw that too. You got a free card if you went early.
I don't remember that. But
big moment of my
what
childhood.
I remember was it had a short subject, Pikachu's Vacation, at the beginning. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, so Pokemon the first movie is like an hour long, and then there's this half-hour short at the beginning. Anyway, we went to see it. Everybody hated it. All the kids at the party thought it was stupid. And I felt like, yes, finally. Finally, we're on the same page about this fucking franchise.
Wow, so vindictive.
But anyway,
Sorry, we opened a dark hole into Will's childhood.
Yeah. I know. I hate it. I've always hated it. Will always hate it. Anyway, go ahead.
I loved Pokemon when I was a kid. But and I have no interest in it now.
That's interesting.
I have no nostalgia like, yes, remember Pokemon. I like to relive it. It's one of those things that, I moved past it. It continued to exist after I stopped caring about it.
Do you dislike it?
No.
What do you think it was about it? Why didn't you bring it with you as you grew up?
I don't know. I mean, it had everything. I'm shocked you didn't like it. Japanese monsters, tons of them. It almost sounds like it was popular and it was something that but you liked something else, so you hated it because that was the popular thing.
So there's a bit of that, but also I frankly found Pokemon too complicated for what the rewards were. Like you had a red video game and a blue video game.
151 monsters that you needed to know the names of?
Yeah.
I would have thought you would have jumped right into that because they're little Godzilla monsters.
Well, I like Godzilla, yeah, but and all I can say to that is I will put Godzilla up against Pokemon any day of the week. Godzilla, he's a big guy who's knocking over buildings.
So he's like the adult monster, and Pokemon are the childish monsters.
Godzilla's really cool.
I know. I'm just trying to see where the dissonance is.
It is a little arbitrary. And I guess
They're too cute.
I was never moved by the story of Pokemon.
But you were moved by that of Godzilla.
Yeah, of course. He's a big nuclear monster. He's Japan's nuclear excesses coming back.
But I mean, Pokemon, I've actually never thought about it until this point where we started talking about Detective Pikachu and being and I was like, man, I don't know, I don't care. Do you have anything like that you love passionately as a kid? Because you seem to have taken all that stuff with you.
Oh yeah, there were definitely things that I didn't. Well, I mean,
that culture has continued. I mean, that's a big ask, but.
Well, I mean, there are certain things that there are certain incarnations of Batman that I still love.
Yeah.
But then, do I still care about Batman in the present tense? Not as much. And some of that might have to do with the fact that Batman is an enormous has never stopped being an enormous cultural force.
Yeah.
The Batman things I like Adam West, they feel kind of like they're mine a little bit,
But they still continue to exist. There's Batman 66 comics, there's animated movies.
Yeah.
Even something like Detective Pikachu, it is all the original Pokemon from when I was a kid. It's not the other million variations that have shown up since then.
Out of curiosity, does Detective Pikachu rub you the wrong way at all? The fact that it's a comedy and it's Ryan Reynolds?
No, I don't care.
Doing comedy voices?
I think I should should take they should take it seriously. I think there's something like 22 Pokemon movies at this point. They can do whatever they want.
Okay, I asked that because it's this version, maybe it isn't hitting the nostalgic pleasure centers for you. Yeah.
Because when I see the stuff that I loved as a kid in the cartoon that I watch endlessly every day, I've had no need to go back to it.
Yeah.
The only time I thought about Pokemon is just the classic, like, philosophical argument of, wait, they capture monsters and force them to fight until they pass out?
You know, speaking of nostalgia, when I first realized that YouTube was a thing, it absolutely blew my mind that I could go on YouTube and see the opening titles of the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. And I watched it like over and over again, and it was like such a nostalgic overload. And I feel like having YouTube, like, you can have a nostalgic overload every day if you want. And
but it loses all meaning, though.
Exactly. It's not special anymore. It's like we're living in Ready Player One.
Yeah, we are. I mean, I was just thinking, too, I'm like, wait, what other stuff that I really loved as a kid? And, like, I mean, anime-wise, Dragon Ball I was obsessed with. I've not gone back to that ever. And I wonder if it's, like, the proliferation of that, kind of like the way that you hated Pokemon so much, that it is still everywhere. And that when you grow up as a kid, like, that may be one of the only things you can watch. Like, that'll play, like, I remember Dragon Ball played at, like, 6 in the morning on some little channel somewhere. And it feels special that way. And then when everybody uses, consumes it and loves it, you're like, oh, that's fine. But now I have other things I can like. And you can, like, more laser focus into the things that really appeal to you.
Oh, by the way, I've come up with an answer to your question. Something
nice.
that I loved passionately as a kid and didn't bring with me. This was one of the first things I ever really cared about when I was, like, 3 or 4 years old. Cars.
What?
Yes.
Cars?
I was obsessed with cars when I was like 3, and I knew what all the logos were.
Wow.
I loved looking at the wheels section of the newspaper. I had a lot of like little Hot Wheels cars. I loved the BMW logo the best.
I had a lot of Hot Wheel cars as well, and you would build like tracks and they could do loops and stuff like that. But I think it was more out of I was a kid, so people bought me cars and I played with them. Not a particular love for them.
I was very fascinated by car trucks, you know?
Car trucks?
Like, you know, those big trucks that carry like 6 or 7 cars. Like,
yeah, and you'd get them and you'd put all your cars in them and you can drive around.
Or when you see them on the highway.
Oh, even like in real life.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, look at all those cars.
I had a weird, I mean, it's not something that I still love them, but I had an obsession with sharks when I was a kid in the way that like I would collect hockey cards of the San Jose Sharks just because it was a shark logo for no other reason. I didn't know anything else about the team.
Yeah.
Such a weird thing to like focus in on.
No, I totally get that. I mean, kids like kids are a law unto themselves.
What about kids today though? Because they can have whatever they want.
Well, kids today, what they like are those like
pew pew die
auto-generated videos of like cartoon characters killing each other,
and like they're pregnant and stuff like that.
And Moo, is that what the character's called? Momo? Who's the character that kills you?
Oh no, yeah, the fake viral videos.
Yeah, that's what they're into.
I'm glad that we can talk like 90-year-old men who don't know what's going on, because that's what we are.